My mother didn't get angry when I asked about my college fund. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even try to deny it. She just looked at me, paused, and said something I had never heard from her before. "You were never meant to see that account." The refrigerator hummed. The ceramic rooster sat on the counter. I looked at my mother for 3 seconds. Then I reached into the folder I had brought, the one I had been carrying under my arm since I walked through the door. The one she had not asked about because my mother does not ask about things she does not want to explain, and I placed it on the kitchen table. "I know," I said, a beat, "but I did. My name is Simone Hargrove. I am 29 years old. I am a paralegal at a civil litigation firm in Atlanta, which means, professionally, that I spend the majority of my working hours building documentary cases, understanding what evidence proves, and recognizing the difference between what someone says happened and what the records show actually happened. I graduated from Georgia State University in 2017 with a degree in political science and $61,400 in student loan debt. I should not have any student loan debt. I know this not because I feel entitled to a debt-free education, but because for 22 years, from the day I was born until the week before I started college in 2013, my mother, Patricia Hargrove, had told me, with consistent and specific pride, that she had been building a college fund for me since my first birthday. She told me about it at Christmas dinners when relatives asked about my future. She told me at my high school graduation. She told me in September of 2012, when I was a senior, that the fund had been growing for years and that I should apply to whatever schools felt right, because she had been planning for this moment since before you could walk. I applied to 4 schools. I chose Georgia State because it was close, and because by then, after a summer of FAFSA applications and financial aid letters, something had begun to feel wrong about the numbers, though I was 17 and I did not yet have the professional vocabulary to name what I was sensing. The financial aid office had reviewed my mother's income disclosure and found me eligible for need-based aid, on a fund my mother had described as substantial. I asked her about it once directly in the fall of 2012. "The fund is there," she said, "but financial aid is free money. Take the free money first. We'll use the fund for emergencies." I had thought this was wisdom. I spent 6 years working part-time, managing a tight budget, and graduating with $61,400 in federal loans. No emergencies had required the fund. I had graduated, begun my career, and because I was the kind of person who trusts people they love until they have a reason not to, set the question aside for 5 years. What changed was a conversation with a colleague named Marcus, who handles estate matters at our firm, and who, over lunch in October, casually mentioned a case he was working on involving undisclosed custodial accounts. "It's more common than people think," he said. "Parents open accounts in a child's name, tell the kid it's for them, and use them as personal slush funds. Sometimes for years." I drove home from work that evening thinking about the ceramic rooster. The next morning, I made a phone call to Anchor Trust Bank. Anchor Trust Bank had a record of an account opened in 1994 under a custodial structure. Patricia Hargrove, custodian; Simone Hargrove, beneficiary. It had been active for 19 years. When I asked for the statement history, the representative said, "I'll need to verify your identity as the named beneficiary." I provided my social security number. She pulled the file. And then she was quiet for a moment in a way that told me everything before she said a word. The account had been opened on March 14, 1994, 3 weeks after my first birthday. Opening balance, $2,000. A birthday gift from my maternal grandparents, who I knew had given my mother money specifically for my future because my grandmother had mentioned it, more than once. At family gatherings, we started Simone's education fund before she could say her own name. My grandparents believed the fund existed and was intact. They had contributed to it at every birthday and Christmas for 11 years, until my grandfather died in 2005, and my grandmother moved to assisted living in 2007, and the contributions stopped. Total documented contributions between 1994 and 2007, $31,400. The Anchor Trust account records showed consistent growth through 2006. The fund had reached $44,200 at its peak in June of that year, with modest but steady investment returns. Then the withdrawals began. August 2006, $3,000, labeled transfer to personal checking. November 2006, $4,500, same label. March 2007, $7,200. September 2007, $6,000. By the time I received the complete statement history, which required a formal written request, submitted on firm letterhead with my identity documentation, and which arrived in a sealed envelope at my apartment 12 days after my initial call, the account had been drawn down in 14 separate transactions over 7 years. Final balance as of July 2013, 1 month before I enrolled at Georgia State, $1,847, $1,000, $800, out of $44,200. I sat in my apartment on a Thursday evening with those statements and a yellow legal pad, and I did what I do professionally. I built the timeline. Each withdrawal, its date, its amount, its corresponding period in our family's life. August 2006, my mother had remodeled the kitchen, the yellow walls, the new appliances. The ceramic rooster purchased, I now recalled her saying, from a boutique in Buckhead. November 2006, a family vacation to Cancun. My mother had said it was a special treat. March 2007, new car. A Lexus ES 350, my mother had driven for 8 years, and which she had always described as something she had saved up for. I kept going. Every withdrawal had a corresponding purchase or period I could identify. The money had not disappeared. It had been converted into a kitchen, a vacation, a car, a patio renovation in 2009, a home theater system in 2010, 2 purchases I could not specifically identify, and a final withdrawal of $8,400 in 2012, the year I was applying to colleges, that had no corresponding record I could trace. Total withdrawn, $42,353. Left for my education, $1,847, and $61,400 in student loans that I had spent 7 years repaying at $420 a month. I put the legal pad down. I sat with that arithmetic for a long time. Then I called my colleague Marcus. I need to understand the legal structure of a custodial account, I said. Specifically, what a custodian can and cannot do with the funds. You working a case, he said. Personal matter, I said, a pause. Simone, are you okay? I will be, I said. Tell me about custodial accounts. A custodial account, specifically a UGMA account. The Uniform Gifts to Minors Act structure that Anchor Trust confirmed had governed her fund, transfers legal ownership of the assets to the minor beneficiary at the age of majority. At 18, the assets legally belonged to Simone, not to her mother, not shared, hers. And what that meant, legally, is something Simone spent 3 weeks understanding in precise detail before she drove to Marietta on a Tuesday afternoon. Stay with me. In the month before I drove to Marietta, my mother called me 4 times. She was, in those calls, entirely herself, warm, engaged, occasionally meddling, asking about my dating life and my apartment, and whether I had seen a particular television program she was watching. She mentioned in the 3rd call that she was thinking about redoing the guest bedroom. Nothing major, she said, just fresh paint and maybe new bedding. That sounds nice, I said. I filed the comment without expression. I was also, in those 4 weeks, building a second document, distinct from the bank statements and the withdrawal timeline. A research document, prepared with the thoroughness I bring to every case file I build at work, on the legal framework governing UGMA accounts under Georgia law. The Georgia Transfers to Minors Act, OC, Section 40, 45110 et sec. Establishes that assets held in a custodial account belong to the minor beneficiary absolutely and irrevocably from the moment of the gift. The custodian, in this case, my mother, is legally obligated to manage the assets for the benefit of the minor and may use them only for that purpose. Using custodial funds for personal expenses, kitchen renovations, cars, vacations, is not a gray area under Georgia law. It is a breach of fiduciary duty. It is, in certain circumstances and above certain thresholds, a criminal matter under Georgia Code Section 4045127, which makes a custodian who misappropriates minors' funds subject to both civil liability and potential criminal prosecution. I printed the statute. I put it in the folder with the bank statements. I also, on the Friday before the Tuesday, had a 30-minute call with an attorney named Vivienne Cole of Cole and Marsh in Atlanta, who specializes in fiduciary disputes and who reviewed the documentation I sent her by secure email the night before our call. The legal structure is clear, Vivienne said. The UGMA account passed to you at majority. The withdrawals from 2006 to 2013 were made without your authorization and without documentation of expenditure for your benefit. You have a viable civil claim. What would recovery look like? I asked. The misappropriated amount, $42,353, plus interest calculated from the date of each withdrawal at the Georgia statutory rate. Potentially legal fees. Potentially treble damages if we can demonstrate intentional breach. I thanked her and told her I would be in touch after Tuesday. She asked, "What's happening Tuesday?" "I'm going to give my mother the opportunity to tell me herself," I said, a pause. "And if she doesn't, then I'll show her what I already know," I said. "And we'll go from there." The folder contained the complete Anchor Trust statement history, the withdrawal timeline correlated with household purchases, the Georgia UGMA statute with relevant sections highlighted, and Vivienne Cole's preliminary assessment memo. Simone had driven to Marietta with a folder that could have gone directly to a courthouse. She had gone to her mother's kitchen first. Because some things deserve to be said in person before they are said in a filing. After my mother said, "You were never meant to see that account," and after I said, "I know." But I did. I opened the folder, and I placed the first document on the kitchen table. The Anchor Trust Statement Summary. 1 page. Balance history from 1994 to 2013. The arc of the account visible at a glance. Growth through 2006, decline through 2013, the final balance of $1,847 circled in blue ink. My mother looked at it. She looked at it the way people look at things they were hoping would not exist in a physical form. "Simone, it was a UGMA account," I said. "I've spoken with an attorney. The assets in a UGMA account belong to the beneficiary from the moment of the gift. They belong to me from 1994 forward. You were the custodian, not the owner." "It was complicated," she said. "Things came up we needed." "Mom," she stopped. I placed the second document on the table, the withdrawal timeline, 14 entries. Dates, amounts, and in the third column, the one I had added the night before, in careful printed handwriting, the corresponding household expenditure. August 2006, $3,000 kitchen renovation. November 2006, $4,500 Cancun vacation. March 2007, $7,200 Lexus EASE 350. She read down the page. Her face did something I had not expected, not the defensiveness I had prepared for, not the anger I had half anticipated. Something older and more complicated, a kind of collapsing. "I was going to replace it," she said. "I always told myself I was going to replace it. You graduated me into $61,400 of student loans," I said, "while this account existed. While you knew it existed. While you had been telling me my entire life that my education was provided for. The loans are manageable. $420 a month for 7 years," I said. "That's $35,280 I have paid so far, on a debt I was not supposed to carry." She looked at the table. I love you, she said. I know you do, I said. That is not the question. Then, what is the question? I looked at my mother across the table where I had eaten breakfast for 18 years, and I said the only thing that was left to say. The question is what happens now. And I'd like you to be part of that answer before a court is. The refrigerator hummed. She put her hands flat on the table. What do you want, Simone? I reached into the folder for the last time. I placed Vivienne Cole's preliminary assessment on the table. I want you to read this, and then I want you to call your attorney. And then I want us to figure out a resolution that doesn't require me to file a civil claim against my own mother. She picked up the memo. She read it. When she set it down, her hands were not steady. $42,000, she said. Plus interest, I said. Plus legal fees if it goes to court. Plus the possibility of treble damages under the statute. Vivienne's number is on the bottom of the page. She looked at the memo for a long time. Then she looked at me. And for the first time in my memory, my mother, who has managed every difficult conversation in my life with the composed authority of someone who has decided, before the conversation begins, where it will end, had no version of this to perform. There was only the table, and the documents, and the arithmetic. Okay, she said quietly, that was all. Okay, she did not need the recording. She did not need the public confrontation, the audience, the performance of exposure. She sat in her mother's kitchen, and she placed the documents on the table one at a time, and she let the paper do what paper does. But what came next, in the attorney's offices, in the negotiation, in the months that followed, is where the story becomes something more than justice. Stay with me. My mother called a family attorney named Robert Price the following morning. Robert Price had handled my parents' estate documents for 12 years. He was, by any reasonable assessment, not the attorney you want representing you in a fiduciary dispute involving a paralegal who works at a civil litigation firm and has retained Vivienne Cole. He called Vivienne on a Thursday. My client would like to explore an informal resolution, he said. That's our preference as well, Vivienne said. We'd like to schedule a meeting within 2 weeks. The meeting took place at Vivienne's office in Midtown Atlanta on a Wednesday afternoon. My mother arrived with Robert Price. She looked like someone who had not slept well in 10 days, which, based on the 3 times she had called me in the interim, conversations I had kept short and factual, and which I had documented in a call log, was probably accurate. Vivienne presented the case in 4 sections. Section 1, the account structure. The UGMA designation, the legal transfer of ownership at majority, the custodian's fiduciary obligation under OCG. Section 40-45110. Section 2, the withdrawals. All 14 transactions with dates, amounts, and the documentation showing transfer to Patricia Hargrove's personal checking account. No corresponding documentation of expenditure for Simone's benefit. Because there was none, because the funds had been used for household purchases unrelated to my education or welfare. Section 3, the damages. The $42,353 misappropriated principal. Interest calculated at the Georgia statutory rate of 7% per annum from the date of each withdrawal, compounding annually, totaling $31,847 in accrued interest as of the date of the meeting. Total direct damages, $74,200. Section 4, the student loan impact. $61,400 in federal loans taken on by the beneficiary due to the depletion of custodial funds that should have covered educational expenses. Vivienne did not include this figure in the damages claim. She noted it as context for the court's consideration of intent and impact if the matter proceeded to litigation. Robert Price reviewed the sections without visible reaction. He is an experienced attorney. He understood what he was looking at. My client acknowledges the account existed and that withdrawals were made, he said. She disputes the characterization of those withdrawals as misappropriation. The funds were used for family purposes that also benefited the minor. Can you document specific expenditures that directly benefited Simone Hargrove? Vivienne asked. A pause. We would need time to compile that documentation. You've had 2 weeks, Vivienne said. We'll schedule a follow-up in 10 days. Any documentation you can produce will be considered. The follow-up meeting happened on a Tuesday. Robert Price produced 2 receipts, a school supply purchase from 2008 totaling $147, and a documented contribution toward my senior class trip in 2012 of $350. Total documented benefit to minor, $497, against $42,353 in withdrawals. Vivienne looked at the receipts. She looked at Robert Price. We'd like to discuss settlement terms, she said. The negotiation took 3 more weeks. My mother had assets, not liquid assets, but equity in the house, a retirement account, a life insurance policy with cash value. Robert Price's job was to protect as much of those as possible. Vivienne's job was to recover what was mine. They found a number. The settlement agreement was executed on a Friday in January, 4 months after the Tuesday in the kitchen. The terms: a lump sum payment of $28,000 from my mother's life insurance policy cash value, payable within 30 days. A structured payment of $1,200 per month for 36 months, total $43,200, drawn from her retirement distributions, secured by a notarized promissory note. Total settlement value, $71,200. Not the full $74,200 in calculated damages. Vivienne had advised that a negotiated resolution without litigation would cost approximately $3,000 in reduced recovery, avoid $8,000 to $12,000 in legal fees, and conclude in months rather than years. I agreed. The promissory note was registered with the Cobb County Superior Court as a formal legal instrument, which meant that in the event of default, I had immediate judicial recourse without filing a new action. My mother signed it, I signed it, we did not hug afterward. We stood in Vivienne's conference room and looked at the signed documents, and then we looked at each other across the table, my mother and I. With an attorney between us and a resolution in front of us, and 29 years of a relationship that had just been permanently altered by the act of putting its most difficult truth into a legal document. I'm sorry, she said, not the performed apology of someone managing a room, the flat, exhausted apology of someone who has run out of performance. I know, I said. I always meant to replace it. I know that too, I said, but meaning to and doing it aren't the same thing. You taught me that. She looked at me. I did, she said. The first monthly payment arrived on the 1st of February, and every first of the month since, on time, without reminder. I applied the first 6 payments directly to my student loan principal. The loan payoff date moved from 2031 to 2027, 4 years closer, because of 6 payments, because of a folder. Because of a Tuesday afternoon in a kitchen in Marietta, and a question I had been afraid to ask for 5 years, and finally asked with the full weight of what I already knew behind it. My grandmother is 83. She lives in an assisted living facility in Smyrna, 20 minutes from my apartment. I visit her on Sundays. I have not told her about the account. Some truths protect the people they would hurt without changing anything that matters. What matters is that the account, the one she and my grandfather started in 1994, with $2,000 and the specific genuine love of grandparents who wanted their granddaughter's future to be secure, is now, finally, doing what it was always supposed to do. Just 29 years late, and through a different mechanism, but arriving, I have thought a great deal about the specific sentence my mother said in that kitchen. You were never meant to see that account. I have turned it over many times, not to extend the wound it made, but because sentences that contain that much reveal that much deserve to be understood carefully. What she meant in the immediate moment was simply, you were not supposed to find the records, the practical meaning, the caught in the open meaning. But underneath that, and this is the part I find myself returning to most often, with the particular attention of someone who works with language and legal documents and understands that what people say under pressure is often truer than what they say when they have time to choose. Their words is a different meaning. You were never meant to see that account means, I built a story for you, and the story required you not to look at certain things. And the things you were not supposed to look at were the things that would have shown you the story was not real. My mother built a story. A generous, loving story in which she was the parent who had planned for my future since before I could walk, who had sacrificed and saved and prepared and wanted nothing but my flourishing. She believed the story. I think that is important to understand. She was not, in her own mind, a person who had stolen from her daughter. She was a person who had borrowed from a fund she intended to repay, who had made reasonable family decisions under financial pressure, who had lost track of the repayment over years of daily life and told herself the story of the full fund because the alternative, the story of the depleted fund, the story of the loans her daughter did not need to take, was one she could not afford to tell herself and continue being who she believed she was. This is the mechanism I want to name clearly because I think it is the most common version of financial harm that families do to each other. Not malice, narrative. The stories we tell ourselves about what we owe each other, and what we deserve, and what counts as borrowing versus taking. And the way those stories require the people we have harmed to not look too closely at the accounts. You were never meant to see that. I was always meant to see that. I was always entitled to see that. From the day I turned 18. The account was mine, and the records were mine, and the truth of what had happened to the fund. My grandparents had started with $2,000, and 30 years of birthday checks was mine to know. What I want to say to every person who is sitting with a question they have been afraid to ask, a financial question, a family question, a question about an account or a fund or a transfer that happened years ago and was never explained is this: you are allowed to ask. You are allowed to request the statements. You are allowed to take the records to a professional and build the timeline and understand what actually happened to what was supposed to be yours. The asking is not disloyal. The asking is not ungrateful. The asking is not a betrayal of the relationship. The asking is the thing that the relationship, if it is a real relationship and not a managed performance, should be able to survive. And if the answer to "can we look at the records together" is you were never meant to see that, then you need to see that, more than ever, because the accounts exist. The records exist. The statements are available to the named beneficiary of any custodial account opened in their name, and they have been available since the day you turned 18, sitting in a bank's filing system, waiting for you to call and ask. Call, ask, get the statements, build the timeline. And if the timeline shows what it showed me, if the numbers tell a story different from the one you were given, find an attorney who understands fiduciary law and bring them the folder. Because the money may be recoverable, but more than the money, the truth is recoverable, and you were always meant to have it. The first payment arrived February 1st. The loan payoff moved 4 years closer. My grandmother and I have lunch on Sundays. She asks if I'm happy. I tell her I'm getting there. She says, "Your grandfather always said the best thing you can leave someone is a foundation they can stand on." He was right. I found mine. A little late, but solid. You were always meant to see the account. Go look. The statements are waiting. If you have ever been told, directly or indirectly, in words or in the careful management of what you were allowed to know, that certain financial truths about your own life were not for you to see, leave one word below. Seen, that's all. And if someone in your life is carrying a question they have been afraid to ask, a question about a fund, a transfer, an account that existed and then somehow didn't, send this to them today. Because the records exist, and they always belong to you.